It seems for me in many ways that making videos is becoming a little more difficult, although it's a nice kind of difficulty because I ruminate on things. Like I say quite often, when I make a video, I ruminate on my circumstance, on my situation, and fundamentally what I've been expressing over the last couple of years, more so than before, is what I find about this, I suppose, almost like an impulse to produce a painting or make a video. What is really going on within me that makes me want to do certain things, that makes me active, that creates there where I become active in some form or other. And I'd like to distinguish between activities that are um, more on the side of instinct or kind of autonomic almost. I mean, we breathe. I don't think about breathing, but I breathe, so I'm alive. And when I'm asleep, I still breathe. So there is an activity that is fundamentally a connection that we have with what I consider to be a mystery that functions with or without my awareness. And what is really motivating me is to function within this mystery with heightened awareness, not just like an amoeba grabbing another morsel, or reducing myself to the most common instincts of my desires or nature, the way I am, the way we understand in terms of being, if we have addictions or if we have proclivities to act in certain ways based on our physical makeup, sex, uh, greed, having the need to have more when you have plenty already. You can only eat so much and have so many of a certain activity before it becomes ridiculous. So what I'm really ruminating on and thinking on, and it's probably to some extent a result of a few things here. And one is the Jody Wilson Raybould testimony in front of Parliament. A huge thing. I feel, and in most circumstances, I don't understand all the nuances and activities behind the scenes, what she was allowed to only talk about certain aspects. There are things she said she would like to talk about, but was muzzled under client, what is that, solicitor-client privilege. I don't understand. I guess Trudeau is the solicitor or the client, I don't understand that, because there are rules that supposedly people have to follow within the system, and if you buck them, you're going to get slapped down. There are things that our conscience would want us to do, but we're not allowed to do, and we have to navigate this very carefully because we don't want to endanger we don't want to subject ourselves to the violence of the man out there. So her testimony has been instrumental in making me think about different things. And another thing that I've been ruminating on to some extent is this Jordan Peterson, and I'm going to call it a phenomenon. And it's somebody that has really populated and dominated a large section of the alternate media with his position and his ideas and his thoughts. And he's like all over the place with his stuff. And I had, from the very beginning, I had the EBGBs around him. He's very articulate and appears to be incredibly insightful about so many different things about the nature of our existence as a social group. He's a clinical psychologist. People apparently are clinical psychologists apparently study behavior and why things are the way they are. I suppose there could be some value in this if you're researching behaviors, but it's basically you're looking at the tip of the iceberg and you're coming to conclusions about something. And I just looked at his icon art on YouTube. It is completely what I consider to be totally idiosyncratic, even nasty, dysfunctional imagery. He's representing himself, and I suspect he said that he was invited to become an honorary member of a Native tribe and the native artist maybe actually made this work. Just because you're native doesn't mean you have enlightenment. It's like people that are still communing with eagles and fish and bear and all that psychologically. I find that to be quite disturbing, to be connected to the animal world in terms of some kind of, like the Egyptians having bird heads on their bodies. It's contrary to my psyche, but I respect people's right to pray and choose if they choose to, I suppose, but I don't want any part of that aspect of it, that anthropomorphizing my nature, my being. We are connected. All life is connected, but this is something that is disturbing. And anyway, this icon art that he has looks very suspiciously like there's a native artist called Morso, and I don't want to go into it in great detail, but I am very suspicious of this artist's work. He was an alcoholic, and the work was almost nightmarish. And I don't think this is the highest part of that native community. The Morso thing, he's been held up as like a swami of artness, and I look at something as it affects me directly personally. I may be wrong. I may be wrong about people, but I am usually right about imagery and color and the way I respond. I have a response to it. And anyway, this Jordan Peterson character has come out and said, he's made great comments, for example, about, he's called our Prime Minister Trudeau, who is now under the gun with Jody Wilson Raybould, he's called him Peter Pan, somebody that never really grew up. And he's implementing policies based on whim and some arbitrary notion about what he believes or thinks the world should look like. And he's absolutely right. The guy, he says he has no virtue. He has by no effort of his own fundamental nature. He's piggybacking on the fame of his father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who was a very famous Canadian politician, had his own baggage, huge baggage. I mean, they all do. I don't need to go into this. You can research this guy. And his hubris and arrogance was unsurpassed in Canadian history. I mean, I don't know. I'm not that qualified to have an opinion on Canadian history. I have a fundamental knowledge, but Trudeau, I probably would rank right up there in terms of self-opinion and the hubris that comes along with thinking yourself to be of higher equality. Some are more equal than others kind of hubris is being propagated. And this son of his, this Justin Trudeau, I think, as Peterson rightfully points out, is just on the piggy bank. He actually called him a weasel. He called him a weasel. But here is my opposition or my pause around this person. Beside the fact that he's so popular, this rings alarm bells. Bring all of it, the whole lot. The whole popular culture, as I perceive it, is propagated. He has a major PR firm working on his behalf and is propagating him, and he's benefiting from it. And whatever money he gets, yeah, go ahead and make 10 times more. You can only eat so much. Apparently, he can only eat red meat these days because he has a physical condition. What a bummer. What a bummer, you know, to have like millions of dollars in your pocket and you can only eat red meat. I'm sorry to hear that, Jordan Peterson. But here was the thing. Okay, I'll just spend another couple of minutes on him. I've made comments on it and on some of his videos, and I actually made a video where he invokes conscience. I thought this was brilliant, but I said, you know, he spent an hour and a half on a whole bunch of crap where he could have said, conscience is the topic of my discussion for an hour and a half. He could have spent an hour and a half. You can just say it and state it simply. But if he wants to be verbose the way he is, go and, do a couple hours on conscience or even an hour, you know. So here was the thing that really gave me pause and made me realize that he is in some kind of agenda-driven camp. Beside the fact he wrote a UN paper on behalf of sustainability and all of that, he's in with the Soros or the Maurice Strong 21, Agenda 21. You have to look into this. He has a history. Anyway, be it as it may, what really gave me pause was the idea that he said, we are not existing in a patriarchy. This is one of his main points. And he ties this in. He has a very clear and indisputable view of the whole gender politic that is being propagated by the Trudeau Peter Pan types now in order to dismantle the very fabric of our society. When you begin to question your sexuality, the person that you are, and I'm looking at sexuality not as an identity as much as being connected to a mystery in a certain way. When you begin to fuck around with that, so to speak, you're going to be in trouble. And to assume that this can be legislated in some way that people can choose their own sex is really delusional. And I'm not advocating that people shouldn't have the right to express themselves. Don't hurt anybody. This is the premise. It's sort of like the 101 humanity Hippocratic oath. Don't hurt anybody. Just, if you feel your life has to be a certain way, live your life and don't hurt anybody. But don't make it into a pronouncement, a political announcement. What is, however, really disturbing for me about Peterson is he says we're not in a patriarchy. How deluded is that? How insane is that? The entire human history is based on the boys running the show, and women and children are chattel. Of course, old people as well, but women and children are chattel, and then you form yourself into a group called men who run the joint. So how could he even argue this? Oh no, men die proportionately as high or much more in wars, not proportionate. Men die, and men are in prisons more, and have all the negative effects of being a man. Yeah, well, this is sort of like the suffering in life is kind of passed on to everybody. But the point is that when you get into these higher echelons of control, it's run by the boys. It's run by the boys. Why he would even bring this up and destroy his entire platform? I'm not interested in any of the stuff because I know he's got an agenda going on. He's promoting something and it fits into his plan to discourage people from understanding a fundamental nature of our existence, our culture that we're a part of, that is so crummy, nasty. And he says, no, it's not really like that. Oh yeah, it's nasty, but not because of that. Well, anyway, that's my point. Now here's what I've been ruminating on, something that I'm trying to articulate for myself. And when I started the video, I said I have impulses that well up in me to make a video, to make a painting. And what is it that is at the bottom, or could be at the bottom of this? And that I really do feel that I've said that when I make a painting, for example, I understand things about myself that I may not have known before. This is a wonderful feeling. It's like to have this self-discovery going on. And it's not something that is necessarily intellectual and verbal. It's just an experience of feeling a connection to something. So when you're creative, for example, if you're a creative person, then there is this sense of satisfaction of having done something that gives one a sense of self. You understand something better about yourself. This is a fundamental notion of what I understand to be alive. And then I proceed out of this, once this is in place, this is active, and I don't have to think about it. These are impulses. It's kind of like breathing. It's autonomic in the sense that this feeling of being part of a mystery has this autonomic aspect to it where I feel impulses, and I don't generally question them, but I question the result. So here I am now saying, well, what is it that I'm contributing other than enlightening myself or coming to understand something about myself, which is very important? What else is at play here? What happens? And this is something that I appreciate when other people reveal of themselves to me. This always inspires me when I see other people making art or something that is extraordinary, something I hadn't thought about, or something that just gives me sensations that I have never experienced, a combination of colors, sounds. When I go and listen to a singer, when I listen to an opera, there are distinct sounds people make that you can listen to La Boheme 100 times, and every singer, if they're good, gives you a different feeling about that sound that you're hearing that you've heard so many times before. The same, you can squeeze yellow or red or green out of a tube. By the time you've finished making a combination and mixing, it's infinite. You see, the variations are infinite. It's sort of like playing chess. There is no computer. If a computer with all the computing possibilities ever computed in the history of the cosmos would not have, in 4.5 billion years, computed all the variations, the possible variations. It's kind of that feeling. Now, how do you explain something as complex as that? Well, I'm giving it a shot as a painter. I do my own version of computing all the what I consider to be the important aspects of this discovery of what it means to be part of a mystery and the art house. So what is my contribution? Now I'm going to refer again. I made a comment on Peterson, somebody that said that, Peterson isn't the only one that's being followed in pop culture. They're all part of it in terms of having all the attention paid to them. If I'm complaining about him having special attention, it's not him. Well, actually, I would disagree. I think that he is quite a phenomenon right now in terms of people paying attention. They've basically forgotten about Noam Chomsky because Noam Chomsky has exposed himself, for example, to me on 9/11. He's irrelevant. He says, no, 9/11 is exactly what they said it was. More or less. He's not going to argue with the company line on this. How can he be brilliant on Central America and just drop 9/11? You see, this is like, again, pop culture heroes always fall. So it's probably not a good idea to be propagated in popular culture in any meaningful way. Keep your head down, keep silent, make your work, do what you do, and have an effect. Of course, I am part of that history of saying, well, I'm making all this work, and it's stuck in my studio. There is something wrong with that as well. So obviously, I do try to promote the work that I make because, well, it's just the nature. It's like there are always contradictions in everything and oxymorons, but we have to live within that that anomalous kind of life. Anyway, my point today, I'm just going to raise a few more things, and that is my contribution after listening to fabulous people. I was just finishing with Catherine Horton interviewing Kevin Annett, who is a person of such high, I have him in such high esteem because of who he's tackling. There have been issues around Kevin Annett as someone who has not followed through on the claims he has made, but I'm saying to myself, my connection to this person in like what I feel to be the most real way is I appreciate the level of the fight this guy has picked to make the world a better place. Like Jody Wilson Raybould picking on the biggest target in terms of the visual side of things anyway. I mean, there are people behind Trudeau and the people that run the joint that is unbeknownst to me or anyone else, but we know they're there. And Catherine Horton did a follow-up on the megalithic banks that are basically can all be traced back to the Vatican, who are undermining us at every step we take. So Catherine Horton, a targeted individual, an incredibly courageous woman who's out there, and she's verbose and she can be vulgar, and I kind of like that. Hey, Catherine Horton, you're kind of sexy when you get off on calling these guys out. And when I say that, it's like it's inspirational. It's like fabulous that somebody who seems to be such a David compared to a Goliath is picking a fight. And I'm nowhere near any of that, but I will still make my statements in my work, and I'll defend my work when it gets into the public domain. So anyway, maybe that's a challenge. Put my work out there and I will defend it. I will defend it. I'm putting it out to the mystery, to the universe, whatever that means. And I say, put my work up, I'll defend it. I've been working up my courage over the last 10, 15 years, probably from the time I made a mark on a surface. It was like building a kind of courage anyway. So, okay, so what is the contribution? And I don't see myself as a presenter of facts in the way that so many YouTubers and other media are presenting facts. Like I'm talking about now a written or verbal something out there. In terms of understanding the world that we exist in. We want to unravel this, and we want to see who are our adversaries, what is coming up, where we come up against living our true selves in the sense of birthright. And if you want to, I was able to talk a little bit about this in an interview that Lonnie Clark did on her Age of Fission radio show. I can't really continue a certain thought. Lonnie gets very excited and interrupts, and I wanted to talk a lot more about birthright, and she gives me a chance, but then it's a little bit hard sometimes to finish a thought. And here's what after I did the interview with Lonnie, I realized, well, what is it that I contribute to some kind of way of resolving primarily the apparent inability for us to have any positive result. Like, if we obviously looking at Fukushima for 8 years, this plant has blown up. This is a major catastrophe that has occurred on this plane of existence, whatever we're in, whatever kind of existence we're in, whatever kind of dimension we exist in. This is a factor. And someone else, I keep thinking of other things I've come across. I was listening to SGT report, and he had the Crow 777 guy on, and he said Chernobyl was a fake event, was a constructed event, just like Fukushima, and nuclear is a hoax. Now, when you get to this level of depravity, this is what happens with truther channels, as far as I'm concerned. They're crawling so far up their own assholes. It's like Lee Camp said, you know, they're fracking themselves with this information, with all this knowledge that is piling one thing on top of the other. And by the time you're done, you're so completely fried in the brain, wherever, in your heart center, you're so completely fried with all your information, you have no more credibility for yourself or anyone else, even though you spout all the truths that you think you're speaking, because you have an agenda. You're dogmatic. You're saying something that basically contradicts what, here is the formula. You observe, you interpret, and you come to a conclusion. And this is something that, okay, nuclear is a hoax. How do you come to that conclusion? On observation, and the interpretation becomes crucial, and then your conclusion, where is it coming from? And I'm saying you're going to make major flaws in this trilogy of events of observation, interpretation, and conclusion without, and here's the other triad, without honesty, love and compassion, and conscience. These have to be functioning when we go through this process of fact and information, of observing. And if I'm honest, I am never wrong. I make mistakes and I will correct them. But if I'm honest, I will never be wrong, even if it takes me a time to fix stuff, right? This is what I'm saying. So my point today, something I'm keenly aware of as I listen to Catherine Horton or Kevin Annett or SGT with his religious dogma at stake, or Jordan Peterson. What you'll notice, and people I regard highly, what you'll notice is that most of their focus is on the world out there. And as far as, or as much as this world is now a monumental threat, other than the normal kind of survival existence, if I imagine myself not to have the technologies or the inventions that womankind has come up with, yes, there was a higher level of anxiety in many ways about being eaten by a wildebeest or trampled by an elephant. I don't know, or bear, whatever. We seem to be congregated in groups, even though we don't relate very much to each other, called societies that reinforce certain survival aspects of our existence. However, what I'm saying is that this world out there that I keep hearing about seems to get no resolution, no matter how passionate and inspiring people appear to be and express through a video on YouTube, for example. What's going on here? This is what I'm saying to myself. And here's my conclusion. I'll end my video here. My conclusion is that there are fundamental notions that I feel within myself every day that are not understood or not clarified. And I'll just come up with a few. You can come up with your own. When you say to yourself, what is prayer? What is world? What is stupid? What is wrong? What is enlightenment? What is emotion? What is feeling? What is thought? What is creativity? These are all things we experience every day, taking for granted, but not really understanding in terms of ourselves. So we always relate fundamental notions of ourself in terms of the world out there, never in terms of the world in there. And as long as I've said this, as long as this continues, that we see ourselves in relation to something that is a physical world, we're not going to have success. This is almost esoteric. I'm not coming at this by reading the Swamis from the East, who are I think there are indicators for me that some of these people have understood that the physical world, that reality, is totally functioning on another level within inside of us that is manifested outside in some form or other. This is nothing new. I'm not saying anything new here. I'm saying that in our culture, in our education, in our interactions, we are continuously confronting something that will not make any difference to our life. We have to find this thread that leads us to some sense. When Lonnie said, for example, that love is greater than fear, which is absolutely true, and that there has to be a love of self. What I want to really impress on people, we cannot love ourselves if we don't give ourselves a reason to love ourselves. Like the idea, just because I'm a creature living, existing on this planet like any other creature, I have a right to be here. That is a form of love, self-love that is given. But it doesn't, in the context that makes a difference to me. I recognize every being's right to be here. But what is more important for me is to give myself a reason to love myself. And the reason I give myself, or the way I give myself a reason to love myself, is to really discover that world that exists within. In terms of the words I just raised, what does that prayer, what does that mean? What does that mean to you? What is a meditation? What does that mean to you? When we get involved in concepts of ourselves, what does that really mean? And not looking at what somebody else is saying, like continuously listening to the Petersons or the Noam Chomsky of the world, or all the enlightened bright types, the Hitchens and the Dawkins and the Marxes and the Karl Marxes and the Jungs and the Kants, and everybody, the whole lot of them, unless it leads us in some way toward this fundamental notion of being able to love ourselves through the effort that we make. And my contribution is how I see it anyway. My contribution on this is I'm not ignoring the treachery and the abject depravity that is being practiced in a world I am relatively isolated from the core, the hardcore stuff of this. But my connection is, I have no explanation other than I share on a certain level, I share a suffering. I share a suffering in other beings and other people. And on some level, this is what must motivate me to keep driving at this, because I sense this connection not only to the good part, but also to the bad part, and having to play my part in countering what it is that bad part. I think that comes pretty close to the way I feel. I must. It's not something that is conscious all the time. I had a dream last night, and it suggested something something like that. I don't remember it exactly, but I woke up feeling that I was involved in something that tied me to a suffering that I hadn't experienced. I was aware of a suffering that I was not. I had never ever experienced personally, but I was aware of it in some way. So I think this is obviously, you know, when we think in terms of, I think compassion is predicated on this sense of being connected to some other person. Sympathy, and empathy is required in order to be able to feel this compassion. And I think that we have, as we feel ourselves, that self-love, as it grows in us, we feel that connection to other people in life in general. It's phenomenal. So what I'm saying is, when I say, you know, what is prayer, what is meditation, what is thinking, what is loving, what is romance, what does that mean? We need to answer those questions in some form or other. I resolve it quite often with my paintings. And my last point would be here: if we're going to make a difference, I admire highly the Jody Wilson Rayboulds and Catherine Hortons, Kevin Annett, with their advocacy. Dana Durnford, screaming his lungs out every day on his program. Check out Dana Durnford of BC. Our spirit on the water. I've called him the spirit on the water, which is biblical. People have missed this one because this is what Durnford is doing. He's going and looking for life in the Pacific tide pools. Fukushima is destroying our ocean. So those are fights. Those are valuable fights. But without us connecting, and I think that people like Durnford and Annett have connected to their inner self, and you know, they're struggling and they're being hammered terribly by the reptiles. As Jordan Peterson would say, it's got nothing to do with the men. I beg to differ, JP. The men that are running this show, it's, you know, there could probably be some women involved, but the impetus of this is the alpha male that is directing the miscreants are alpha males directing the playbook here, and to suggest it's not a patriarchy, it's not coming out of the male side of things, is like saying Akhenaten was a hermaphrodite, I guess. I don't know, but that's my point. That's my point today. So I'm stating the obvious again, and finding that balance of acting in the world after having done that inner work is crucial, and we're not going to see any results in our own lives and collectively until that's been done. I say it again, that's been done. So I hope that helps. Well, it helps me to clarify for myself. Today I was thinking about this. What is it that I'm contributing? Because I'm not out there researching all the nitty-gritty of all the misdeeds that are going on, but I feel the suffering of the people that are subjected more directly to this, and I admire when they pick their fight. I admire when they pick their fight.